While I was dodging Taliban bullets in Afghanistan, Karen Whitmore stole my family's 200-acre ranch and texted me a photo of a bulldozer parked on my grandmother's grave. I came home to McMansions, where my cattle used to graze. Karen stood there, smirking, clipboard in hand. "Welcome home, soldier," she purred. "We improved your little property while you were playing war." Playing war. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her civilian life. My ranch sat on a federal military land grant from 1943. Karen hadn't just stolen property, she'd committed treason against a military family. Federal crime. Life imprisonment. She thought she was picking on a helpless deployed soldier. Instead, she'd just declared war on the entire U.S. Army. What would you do if someone stole your family legacy while you served overseas? Drop a flag if you think Karen got what she deserved. Because this story ends with federal agents at her door. My name is Sergeant First Class Rebecca Torres, and 3 months ago I thought my biggest enemy was the Taliban. I was wrong. My real enemy was a 52-year-old soccer mom with a law degree and the moral compass of a used car salesman. The Broken Arrow Ranch, 200 acres of Texas hill country, had been Torres land since 1892. My great-grandfather Manuel earned it with Pacific theater blood, built our legacy with calloused hands and government promises. When my grandmother Elena passed in 2018, she made me swear on her deathbed, "Mija, never let strangers take what's ours." I deployed to Afghanistan 3 weeks later, leaving the ranch with Walt Kowalski, my 89-year-old neighbor. Walt was Korean War solid, the kind of man who'd rather cut off his own hand than break a promise. He'd been watching our cattle since before I was born. "Don't you worry, Becca," he said, gripping my shoulder with hands still strong from decades of ranch work. "This place will be exactly like you left it." That's when Karen Whitmore slithered into Wildflower Estates, the luxury subdivision next door. Picture every HOA horror story you've ever heard, then add a freshly divorced real estate lawyer with abandonment issues and a white Range Rover that cost more than most people's houses. Within her first week, Karen called the county about agricultural odors from my cattle. Week 2 brought noise complaints about roosters crowing at dawn, roosters that had been crowing on that land for 30 years. By month 3, she was hosting concerned neighbor meetings in her living room that smelled like vanilla candles and desperation. "That ranch is destroying our property values," she told anyone who'd listen, gesturing with her manicured nails like a general planning an invasion. Something needs to be done about the Torres situation. The Torres situation. Like my family was a problem to be solved. While I was dodging mortars in Kandahar, Karen was mining county records like she was searching for oil. She found a 1970s covenant requiring residential conformity legal language so vague it could mean anything she wanted it to mean. Here's your first legal nugget. Restrictive covenants can be weaponized decades after they're written if someone knows how to file the right paperwork. Takeaway. Always check what ancient legal documents might be attached to your property. Karen immediately incorporated the Wildflower Estates Community Association, named herself president, and began foreclosure proceedings against my non-conforming agricultural use. Her lawyer sent the required notices to my ranch address, where nobody lived except cattle and Walt's failing eyesight. Poor Walt found stacks of certified letters but couldn't read the fine print. At 89 with arthritis, legal documents looked like hieroglyphics. He figured they were Medicare scams and filed them in his kitchen drawer next to expired Walmart coupons. Meanwhile, I was in a valley so remote that cell service was a myth and internet came through a satellite dish held together with duct tape and prayers. The sound of gunfire was constant, but not the kind that settles property disputes. 6 months later, Judge Harrison, who probably hadn't read past the case number, issued a default judgment, $47,000 in community improvement fees plus Karen's legal costs. The ranch would be auctioned to recover community damages. Second legal nugget, the Service Members Civil Relief Act protects deployed military from legal proceedings, but you have to know it exists to invoke it. Takeaway, military families should always notify courts of deployment status in writing. Karen's LLC won the auction with a $50,000 bid on $2.3 million worth of prime Texas real estate. By the time my boots touched American soil, she'd already started construction on Wildflower Estates Phase 2, luxury living where nature used to be. I came home to the sound of bulldozers eating my childhood, the smell of diesel exhaust where my grandmother's roses once bloomed, construction crews wearing hard hats crawling over land where my great-grandfather's hands first touched Texas soil, and Karen, standing in her air-conditioned trailer like a queen surveying her conquered territory, actually waved at me. I stormed into that construction trailer like I was clearing a Taliban compound, still wearing my desert boots and 3 years of barely controlled rage. Karen looked up from her MacBook with the kind of fake surprise that screamed guilty conscience. "Oh, Rebecca." "You're back early," she purred, like I was interrupting her book club instead of finding my family's legacy being strip-mined for profit. "I was just finalizing the landscape plans for your old property." My old property. The audacity hit me like incoming mortar fire. The stack of papers she handed me was thick as a phone book: legal documents, permits, architectural drawings for Wildflower Estates Phase 2, executive living. My family cemetery was marked as community garden space. My great-grandfather's barn, built with his own hands after surviving Guadalcanal, was labeled demolished for safety compliance. Karen's smile could have frozen hell. "Everything's perfectly legal, sweetie. Your neighbor Walt received all the proper notices. We even have his signature on the acceptance forms." Wait, Walt's signature? My blood turned arctic. I drove to the county courthouse, that limestone building reeking of old paper and bureaucratic defeat. Dolores Martinez, the county clerk, had been waiting for me like a guardian angel with 20 years of experience spotting legal fraud. "Honey, this whole thing stinks worse than roadkill in August," she said, spreading out the files. "Karen filed HOA incorporation papers exactly 1 week after your deployment orders were published in the base newsletter. She was hunting you. I remembered my JAG training: foreclosure notices must be properly served, and deliberately avoiding service is federal fraud. But something else nagged at me. Dolores, Karen mentioned Walt signed acceptance forms. Can you check?" Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Here we go. Walt Kowalski's signature on HOA membership acceptance dated 3 months ago." She squinted at the screen, then at me. "Rebecca, Walt's been in the hospital with pneumonia for 4 months. I visit him every Sunday." The room spun. Karen hadn't just committed foreclosure fraud, she'd committed identity theft and document forgery against an 89-year-old Korean War veteran. "That signature's fake," I breathed. "Gets better," Dolores continued, pulling up more records. 3 other military families, same pattern. All had elderly caretakers who mysteriously signed HOA agreements while those caretakers were hospitalized or incapacitated. This wasn't random greed. This was a systematic criminal enterprise targeting military families and elderly veterans. Attorney Sarah Chen at Veterans Justice Project took my call immediately. When I explained the forged signatures, her response was swift. "We're not just talking civil fraud anymore. This is federal racketeering RICO violations. Prison time." I spent the afternoon documenting everything: forged signatures, backdated permits, the timeline proving Karen's systematic stalking of military deployments. The smell of toner and courthouse coffee became the scent of building a federal case. Meanwhile, Karen was accelerating construction like she sensed incoming danger. Heavy machinery rumbled across my grandmother's flower garden, the hydraulic whine of excavators tearing through sacred ground making my teeth ache. That evening in Walt's kitchen, I showed him the forged signature. His weathered hands trembled as he stared at the document. "That ain't my writing, Becca. Haven't been able to hold a pen steady since the stroke." His voice cracked with rage. "She used my sickness against your family." My phone buzzed. Unknown number in combat. That usually meant trouble. "Welcome home, soldier. Hope you're enjoying the improvements. Since you're back now, we'll need you to sign the easement paperwork for the new subdivision access road. Runs right through where your grandmother's house used to stand. By the way, Walt sends his regards from his hospital stay. -K." The attached photo showed a bulldozer parked directly on my grandmother's grave, crushing the headstone that had stood for 30 years. But Karen had included something else: a photo of Walt's forged signature with a message. Amazing how cooperative elderly neighbors become with the right motivation. She was taunting me, confessing to crimes via text message like some Bond villain who couldn't resist gloating. I forwarded everything to Sarah Chen immediately. Her response came back in minutes. "Rebecca, Karen just confessed to federal crimes in writing: identity theft of a veteran, document forgery, elder abuse, and desecration of human remains. This isn't civil court anymore. This is federal prison territory." Within an hour, Chen had contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division. Within 2 hours, federal investigators were requesting all of Karen's communications and financial records. Karen thought she was untouchable because she was picking on deployed soldiers and sick old men, but she'd just picked a fight with the entire federal government. My phone rang again. This time it was Chen, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. Rebecca, the FBI wants to use your case as the centerpiece of a multi-state investigation into military family exploitation. Karen's about to learn why you don't mess with America's defenders. The next morning, I woke to the sound of chainsaws. Through my trailer window, I watched Karen's crew cutting down the century-old oak tree where 4 generations of Torres children had carved their names. The tree my great-grandfather planted the day he returned from Guadalcanal, the one that had shaded my grandmother's wedding photos. The massive oak crashed with a sound like artillery fire, its ancient branches crushing wildflowers that had bloomed every spring since 1945. Karen stood at the property line, coffee cup in hand, watching the destruction like prime-time entertainment. "Morning, neighbor," she called out cheerfully. "Don't worry, we're planting lovely Bradford pears where that old eyesore used to be. Much more appropriate for our community standards." I bit back the urge to introduce her face to that coffee cup. Every word she spoke was evidence for the federal case Sarah Chen was building. But Karen was building something too, a coalition of people who wanted me gone. By noon, my phone was buzzing with calls from other military families. Word spread through veteran networks faster than wildfire. Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez from Killeen had lost his family farm while deployed to Syria. Captain Patricia Washington returned from Kuwait to find her commercial property transformed into Karen's luxury shopping center. The pattern was surgical. Elderly caretakers mysteriously hospitalized, forged signatures on HOA documents, foreclosures conducted while soldiers couldn't respond from combat zones. We met at Sarah Chen's Austin office, the conference room thick with the smell of coffee and barely controlled rage. Sarah spread out a Texas map dotted with red pin 7 confirmed cases across 6 counties, $12.3 million in stolen military property. Karen's ex-husband Bradley provides the legal framework, Sarah explained. Their bitter divorce is performance art. They're still business partners in systematic military family exploitation. But while we were planning legal strategy, Karen was escalating to psychological warfare. The anonymous letters started that week. Neighbors received typed notes claiming I was mentally unstable and dangerous due to combat PTSD. The letters suggested I was planning to take revenge against innocent community members and recommended calling police if they saw suspicious military-style behavior. The whisper campaign was masterful. Suddenly, neighbors who'd known me since childhood crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Parents pulled their children inside when I walked past. The grocery store clerk asked if I needed professional help dealing with my situation. Karen was isolating me, turning my own community into weapons against me. But her masterstroke came on a Friday evening. I returned from meeting with federal investigators to find my trailer surrounded by police cars, red and blue lights strobing through the darkness like a war zone. Sheriff Deputy Collins, who'd gone to high school with my older brother, approached with his hand resting on his weapon. "Rebecca, we received reports that you've been making threats against neighborhood residents. Several witnesses claim you've been conducting surveillance of their homes and talking about revenge operations." My blood turned Arctic. "That's complete bullshit, Collins, and you know it. Ma'am, I need you to remain calm. We also received reports that you've been stockpiling weapons and military equipment in preparation for some kind of attack." Karen had orchestrated this perfectly. False police reports, fake witnesses, manufactured evidence designed to make me look like an unhinged veteran who'd snapped under pressure. The kind of story that would discredit everything I'd told federal investigators. "Deputy, I think you will find those reports came from the same person who's currently under federal investigation for racketeering," I said carefully, knowing every word was being recorded. But Karen had planned for that, too. As the deputies searched my trailer, finding nothing suspicious except my legally owned hunting rifle, she appeared at the edge of the crowd that had gathered to watch the show. "Officers, I'm so glad you're taking this seriously," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've all been terrified. Poor Rebecca clearly needs help, not harassment from federal agents filling her head with conspiracy theories." The crowd murmured agreement. Karen had successfully painted herself as the concerned neighbor trying to help a troubled veteran, while I looked like the dangerous one surrounded by police. But Karen made one crucial mistake. In her performance for the crowd, she mentioned details about the federal investigation that hadn't been made public. Details only someone directly involved would know. Deputy Collins caught it too. His eyes sharpened as he looked between Karen and me. After the crowd dispersed and the police left empty-handed, Collins lingered by my trailer. "Rebecca, off the record, I've known your family my whole life. Your grandmother helped raise half this town. This whole thing stinks like 3-day-old fish." He handed me his card. "Federal Agent Martinez left this for you. Said to call immediately. Something about Karen making another tactical error tonight." Karen thought she'd destroyed my credibility. Instead, she just handed federal prosecutors evidence of obstruction of justice and filing false police reports. The war was far from over. Agent Martinez's voice cut through my rage like a blade. "Ms. Torres, Karen revealed classified investigation details during her police performance last night. She's been conducting surveillance on federal agents. That's a national security violation." But Karen wasn't retreating. She was escalating with the desperation of someone who'd burned every bridge and had nowhere left to run. The next morning, I drove to the ranch and found a scene from a war zone. Karen's construction crew had torn through my family's cemetery with backhoes, treating consecrated ground like a construction debris pile. Broken headstones lay scattered across the mud like shattered bones. My great-great-grandmother's marble angel, carved in 1923 by a master stonemason, was cracked in half and tossed into a debris pile next to concrete chunks and twisted rebar. The smell of diesel fuel and disturbed earth made me gag. This was what desecration smelled like. Karen stood beside her pristine Range Rover, phone pressed to her ear like she was coordinating a garden party instead of grave robbery. "Yes, the cemetery removal is ahead of schedule," she was saying to whoever would finance this nightmare. "Foundation pour for Phase 3 starts Tuesday. Removal, like my ancestors, were furniture cluttering up her investment opportunity." She noticed me recording and actually smiled. "Rebecca." Perfect timing. I was just updating our investors on the land preparation efficiency. Her voice dripped false sweetness. "Don't worry about your relatives. We relocated them to a public cemetery, much more appropriate than this old family plot." "Where are the court orders for exhumation?" I kept my voice level despite wanting to strangle her with her designer scarf. "Oh, you know government paperwork. Takes forever." She waved dismissively. "But everything's legal. We have proper documentation." Except she didn't. Relocating human remains requires judicial approval, family consent, and archaeological oversight. Karen had violated every law protecting burial sites and was gambling. I couldn't stop her fast enough. I called Sarah Chen immediately. Her response was nuclear. "Rebecca, she just committed multiple felonies. Desecration of human remains, destruction of archaeological sites, violation of federal burial protection laws. Your great-grandfather's land grant includes tribal sites that carry 20-year sentences. Federal marshals arrived within 2 hours, but the damage was catastrophic. A century of Torres family history lay scattered like archaeological debris across Karen's construction site. Agent Martinez brought crime scene investigators who photographed every broken headstone, every disturbed grave, every piece of evidence proving Karen had systematically destroyed protected burial grounds. This transcends property fraud," Martinez told me as we watched investigators work. "This is cultural genocide, the civilian equivalent of what war criminals do to erase entire peoples." But Karen's most dangerous escalation came that evening. I was reviewing crime scene photos when 3 black SUVs pulled into my driveway. Not federal agents, private military contractors in tactical gear that screamed overseas conflict experience. The team leader approached with the casual confidence of someone who'd killed people professionally. "Ms. Torres, we represent Whitmore Development Associates. Time to discuss your interference with legitimate business operations. These weren't local thugs. These were mercenaries, the kind who handled problems for corporations operating in legal gray zones. Our client offers substantial compensation for cooperation," he continued, "but if you persist with false federal claims, we'll protect our client's interests through Kinetic Solutions." Kinetic Solutions. Military contractors speak for violence. I stepped outside, phone recording in my pocket. "Are you threatening a federal witness?" "We're proposing a business arrangement." But accidents happen to troublemakers. Veterans have such tragic suicide rates. Combat stress affects people unpredictably. They'd just threatened to murder me and stage it as PTSD suicide. The recording went to FBI servers within minutes. Martinez called back immediately. "Rebecca, Karen just committed domestic terrorism. Threatening federal witnesses carries mandatory life sentences. We're moving tonight." But as federal agents prepared to arrest Karen's entire organization, my phone rang with a number that made my blood freeze, my current commanding officer at Fort Hood. "Sergeant Torres, you need to report to base immediately. We've received serious allegations about your conduct during deployment. There are questions about your service record, your mental fitness, and possible security violations involving classified information." My stomach dropped. Karen had found my one vulnerability, my military career. If she could get me court-martialed or discharged, I'd lose all credibility as a federal witness. Sir, what kind of allegations? That's classified pending investigation. Report to base detention facility immediately for questioning. Karen had just played her nuclear option. While federal agents were preparing to arrest her, she'd somehow convinced Army investigators that I was the real criminal. If she could destroy my military career, she could discredit the entire federal case against her. The war had just escalated to a level I never saw coming. The drive to Fort Hood felt like driving to my own execution. Karen had somehow convinced Army investigators that I, a decorated combat veteran, was a security threat. If she could destroy my military career, the entire federal case would collapse. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, my former Afghanistan commander, entered the interrogation room with an expression that had terrorized Taliban fighters and incompetent officers alike. Sergeant Torres, we've received serious allegations that you've been sharing classified information with civilian attorneys and filing fraudulent claims about non-existent military land grants. My heart stopped. Those charges meant decades in Leavenworth. Ma'am, the land grants are real, documented in the National Archives since 1943. Colonel Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Sergeant, I've reviewed the archives personally. There are no military land grants from 1943 in Texas. The program ended in 1935. Either you're lying or someone's been feeding you fabricated documents. The room tilted. If the colonel was right, my entire case was built on forged documents. Karen hadn't just stolen my property. She'd manipulated me into believing I had protections that never existed, but something felt wrong. The anonymous tips, the perfect timing, the detailed knowledge of military procedures, this felt like an inside job. Colonel, permission to call the county clerk to verify the documentation? When Dolores Martinez answered, her voice was electric with excitement. Rebecca, I've been trying to reach you. I found something explosive. Dolores, the Army says military land grants from 1943 don't exist. Are our documents fake? Honey, your documents are 100% authentic. I've been cross-referencing with federal archives all day. But here's what's terrifying. Someone has been systematically accessing the National Archives database to alter military land grant records. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Digital records showing legitimate 1943 military land grants have been modified or deleted within the past 6 months. Someone with high-level government access has been erasing evidence of military family property rights. Colonel Mitchell leaned closer to hear. Who has that kind of access? That's the scary part, Dolores continued. The access logs show modifications made using Department of Defense credentials, specifically former Judge Advocate General accounts that still have archive privileges. The pieces exploded together in my mind like an IED detonation. Bradley Whitmore, I breathed. He's not just Karen's ex-husband and legal partner. He's a former Army JAG officer. Colonel Mitchell's expression shifted from interrogation to combat readiness. You're telling me a former military attorney has been using classified government access to help civilians steal federal land? It's worse than that, I realized. He's been using military personnel databases to identify deployment schedules, target vulnerable families, and manufacture false security allegations against witnesses. Bradley hasn't just been helping Karen steal property. He's been using his security clearance to wage systematic warfare against active-duty military families. And the colonel was already reaching for her secure phone. This isn't fraud anymore. This is treason. Using classified military resources to harm service members is a capital offense. Everything made horrifying sense. The perfectly timed attacks on deployed soldiers, the detailed knowledge of military legal procedures, the ability to file credible false allegations against federal witnesses. Bradley hadn't just provided legal expertise, he'd weaponized his military training against the families he'd sworn to protect. Colonel, Bradley has been inside our system the entire time. Every move we've made, every strategy we've planned, he's known about it through his classified access. Not anymore. Colonel Mitchell's voice carried the cold fury of a commander who'd discovered an enemy infiltrator. Sergeant Torres, you're not being investigated. You're now the primary witness in a military tribunal that's going to destroy 2 traitors who thought they could profit from betraying their own brothers and sisters in arms. The hunter had just become the hunted. Within 24 hours, Fort Hood transformed into a war room that would have impressed Pentagon strategists. The base conference center became ground zero for what Colonel Mitchell called Operation Family Shield. a joint military federal task force designed to dismantle the largest military corruption network in Texas history. The smell of fresh coffee and determination filled the air as investigators from every alphabet agency converged on our case. FBI agent Martinez led the federal side while Colonel Mitchell coordinated military intelligence. Maps covered every wall, showing red pins where Bradley and Karen had struck 17 military families across 8 states, $43 million in stolen property. This isn't just Texas, Agent Martinez explained to the assembled team. Bradley's been using his JAG credentials to access military personnel databases nationwide. Every time a soldier deploys overseas, he identifies vulnerable property situations and feeds targets to Karen's network of associates. The scope was staggering. Bradley hadn't just been helping his ex-wife steal my ranch. He'd created a systematic machine for exploiting military families during their most vulnerable moments. Sarah Chen arrived from Austin with banker's boxes full of evidence. We've traced shell companies in 12 states, all connected to Bradley's legal network. The pattern is identical. Target deployed soldiers, corrupt elderly caretakers, forge documents, foreclose properties, flip them for massive profits. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez, one of the other victims, worked in military intelligence and understood digital forensics. He'd been quietly analyzing Bradley's cyber fingerprints for weeks. "Look at this," James said, pulling up computer screens full of data that looked like military targeting information. Bradley's been using Pentagon databases to research deployment schedules, family situations, even medical records of elderly caretakers. He knows exactly when soldiers will be unreachable and which families have valuable property. The technical details made my head spin, but James explained it in terms any soldier could understand. Bradley had turned military intelligence capabilities into a precision weapon against military families. Every database designed to protect us, he'd perverted to attack us. Captain Patricia Washington, the third victim in our group, brought her own expertise as a military legal officer. "I've been researching precedents for military officers who abuse their security clearances. The maximum sentence for treason during wartime is death. Even during peacetime, Bradley's looking at life imprisonment without parole. The legal strategy was becoming clear. We weren't just seeking justice for property theft, we were building a treason case against a military officer who'd betrayed every oath he'd ever taken." Colonel Mitchell coordinated with military police investigators who specialized in security breaches. Bradley's been active in JAG alumni networks, veteran organizations, even military family support groups. He's been mining these connections for targets while pretending to help military families with legal issues. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking. Bradley had used military camaraderie, the sacred bond between service members, to identify and destroy the families he'd sworn to protect. But our planning wasn't just about prosecution. Agent Martinez explained the immediate tactical situation. Bradley and Karen know we're closing in. They're liquidating assets, destroying evidence, and preparing to flee the country. We have maybe 72 hours before they disappear into non-extradition countries. The timeline was brutal. We had 3 days to gather enough evidence for bulletproof federal charges, coordinate arrests across multiple states, and prevent 2 traitors from escaping justice. Technical support came from military cybersecurity specialists who could trace Bradley's digital footprints through classified systems. Every time he accessed military databases, he left electronic signatures, explained Staff Sergeant Chen, a cybersecurity expert. We can prove exactly when he searched for deployment information, family records, and property documents. Here's a knowledge nugget that shocked everyone. Military personnel databases contain detailed information about family assets, deployment schedules, and emergency contacts information that's supposed to help commanders support military families during crisis. But Bradley had been using it as a targeting system for civilian criminals. The takeaway was chilling. Military families need to understand that their personal information is stored in databases that could be compromised by insiders with malicious intent. Community support came from unexpected sources. Walt Kowalski, despite his age and the trauma of being attacked, insisted on participating in the operation. "That son of a bitch used my sickness to hurt Becca's family. I want to help nail his hide to the wall." Local veteran organizations mobilized resources we hadn't expected. The VFW post provided meeting space, the American Legion supplied volunteers for surveillance, and the Military Family Foundation offered funding for any legal expenses not covered by federal resources. By the end of day 2, Our war room looked like a military intelligence center. Detailed timelines covered every wall, showing Bradley's attacks on military families going back 4 years. Financial flowcharts traced money through dozens of shell companies. Communication intercepts revealed conversations between Bradley and Karen planning their next targets. The trap was set. Now we just had to close it before they realized how completely we'd infiltrated their operation. While we were building our case at Fort Hood, Bradley and Karen were preparing for war. Their first move came at dawn on day 3, a coordinated assault on every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The county courthouse burned at 4 a.m. Dolores Martinez called me in tears as fire engines screamed through downtown. Rebecca, they torched the records room. 40 years of property documents gone. Everything we used to build your case destroyed. The fire department called it electrical failure, but we knew better. Bradley understood that physical records were harder to reconstruct than digital files. By destroying the courthouse archives, he'd eliminated the paper trail, proving his systematic exploitation of military families. But arson was just the opening move. That afternoon, my phone rang with Walt's number, but it wasn't Walt's voice. "Ms. Torres, your elderly friend is enjoying our hospitality." The voice was professional, cold, like a corporate executive discussing quarterly projections. "Mr. Kowalski is safe as long as you cease cooperation with federal investigators. Continue your harassment of Ms. Whitmore's business interests, and the old gentleman might suffer another unfortunate accident." They'd kidnapped an 89-year-old Korean War veteran to silence my testimony. I called Agent Martinez immediately. Her response was swift and brutal. "Rebecca, kidnapping a federal witness is a death penalty offense." Bradley and Karen just escalated to capital crimes. Within hours, FBI hostage rescue teams were coordinating with military police investigators. But Bradley had chosen his timing perfectly. Walt's disappearance coincided with a federal court hearing where I was scheduled to testify about the systematic targeting of military families. Without Walt's testimony corroborating the forged signatures, our case against Bradley's identity theft schemes would be significantly weakened. Karen's next move targeted our financial resources. Every military family involved in the case suddenly faced IRS audits, claiming we owed back taxes on unreported income from fraudulent insurance claims. The audits were obviously manufactured, but they froze our bank accounts and consumed resources we needed for legal fees. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called me, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They're claiming I received combat pay I wasn't entitled to. $30,000 in alleged overpayments, plus penalties and interest. My wife's scared they're going to garnish my military paycheck." Captain Washington faced similar harassment. "IRS is claiming my disability benefits were fraudulent. They want documentation proving I was actually injured in Kuwait documentation that was supposedly lost in a clerical error at the Veterans Administration." The pattern was surgical. Bradley was using his knowledge of military pay systems to create credible false allegations against every witness in our case. Even if the charges were eventually dismissed, the immediate financial pressure was designed to force us into settlement negotiations. But Bradley's most dangerous escalation came through channels I never saw coming. My phone rang at midnight, my current unit commander at Fort Hood. "Sergeant Torres, you're being recalled to active duty immediately. We've received intelligence that your involvement with civilian investigators has compromised operational security for your former unit in Afghanistan." My blood turned to ice. "Sir, what kind of compromise?" "Classified. Report to base security immediately for polygraph examination and possible court-martial proceedings." Bradley was using his military connections to manufacture security violations that could land me in Leavenworth for decades. If I was facing court-martial, I couldn't testify in federal court against his criminal network. But as I drove to Fort Hood in the pre-dawn darkness, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop now, or everyone you care about gets hurt. Your fellow soldiers in Afghanistan are easy targets when someone knows their patrol routes." B. Bradley had just threatened active combat troops overseas. I pulled over and called Colonel Mitchell immediately. Her response was incandescent rage. "That son of a bitch just threatened military personnel in a combat zone. That's not just treason, that's aiding and abetting enemy forces during wartime." Within minutes, every military intelligence asset in Afghanistan was securing American troops against potential insider threats. The Pentagon was treating Bradley's threat as a clear and present danger to national security. But Bradley's final gambit was personal. As I arrived at Fort Hood, Agent Martinez called with news that made my hands shake. "Rebecca, we've lost contact with Sarah Chen." Her office was burglarized last night, and she hasn't responded to communications for 8 hours. Sarah Chen, the attorney who'd taken our case pro bono and built the legal framework for prosecuting military family exploitation, missing, possibly dead. There's more, Martinez continued. Every attorney who's worked on military family protection cases has received death threats in the past 12 hours. Bradley and Karen aren't just destroying evidence, they're eliminating anyone who could prosecute them. As I sat in the Fort Hood parking lot, watching military police converge on the base security building, I realized Bradley had escalated beyond simple property theft. He was conducting asymmetric warfare against the entire military justice system. The final battle was about to begin, and it would determine whether military families could ever feel safe from predators wearing the uniform. The Fort Hood security building felt like entering a fortress under siege. Military police surrounded the perimeter while federal agents coordinated from makeshift command centers that smelled like burned coffee and institutional panic. Colonel Mitchell met me at the entrance, her expression grim as winter in Afghanistan. "Sergeant Torres, we found Sarah Chen. She's alive, but barely." Bradley's people held her in an abandoned warehouse for 18 hours, demanding she turn over all case files related to military family prosecutions. My stomach lurched. Did she give them anything? Sarah's tougher than Taliban interrogators. She gave them nothing, but they left her with a message. Surrender all evidence against Bradley's network or more attorneys die. Bradley had declared war on the entire legal profession willing to defend military families. This wasn't just about my ranch anymore, it was about whether civilians could terrorize military justice with impunity. But while Bradley was escalating to violence, we'd been setting our own trap. "Rebecca, what I'm about to tell you is classified above your clearance level," Colonel Mitchell said, leading me into a secure communications center. For the past 72 hours, military intelligence has been monitoring every electronic communication Bradley makes. Every phone call, every email, every financial transaction. The screens around us displayed real-time surveillance data that looked like something from a spy movie. Bradley's location, his associates, his communications, everything mapped out like enemy targets in a combat zone. We let him think he was winning while we documented every crime he committed. The arson, the kidnapping, the threats against combat troops, all recorded, all admissible in federal court. Agent Martinez joined us, carrying a tablet full of evidence. Bradley just made his fatal mistake. He's been coordinating with Karen using encrypted messaging, but military intelligence cracked their communications. We have recordings of them planning to murder federal witnesses. She played an audio file that made my blood freeze. Bradley's voice. "The Torres woman is the key witness. Eliminate her, and the entire federal case collapses." Karen's response. "What about the other military families? Rodriguez, Washington, the rest?" Bradley. "Unfortunate training accidents happen all the time. Military families understand the risks of service. They were planning to murder multiple military families and make it look like random accidents." "There's more," Martinez continued. "Bradley's been coordinating with foreign agents interested in military family property near sensitive installations. He's been selling information about base security to hostile intelligence services. The treason charges had just escalated to espionage. Bradley wasn't just stealing from military families, he was selling American national security to foreign enemies. But our most shocking discovery came from analyzing Bradley's financial records. "The money trail leads to a network of corrupt officials across 8 states, explained Captain Washington, who'd been working with federal forensic accountants. Judges, county commissioners, IRS agents, even Pentagon officials, all receiving payments from Bradley's shell companies in exchange for targeting military families. The corruption was systematic, reaching into every level of government that was supposed to protect service members and their families. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "Sergeant Torres, this is Walt. They're holding me in an abandoned ranch house 20 miles north of Austin. 3 guards, armed. They plan to move me tonight. GPS coordinates attached. Tell them I'm proud of what you're doing. W." Walt had somehow gotten access to communication and was providing intelligence on his own kidnapping. At 89, he was conducting his own resistance operation. Colonel Mitchell studied the coordinates. That location is federal land, part of a military training area. Bradley chose it because he thought federal agents couldn't access it without Pentagon authorization. "Which they just got," Agent Martinez added with grim satisfaction. "Joint military federal hostage rescue operation launches in 30 minutes. But as we prepared to rescue Walt and arrest Bradley's entire network, my secure phone rang with a call that changed everything. General Patricia Hawkins, commanding officer of U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command, was on the line. "Sergeant Torres, I'm calling to inform you that Bradley Whitmore has just surrendered to Pentagon security, claiming he has information about a terrorist plot against military installations in Texas. My heart stopped. Ma'am, that's impossible. Bradley is the terrorist. He's claiming you and your associates are the real threat, that you've been working with foreign agents to infiltrate military databases and steal classified information about base security. Bradley's final gambit was turning the entire investigation upside down. He was claiming that we were the traitors and he was the patriot trying to stop us. General, that's completely false. We have recordings of Bradley planning to murder military families, which he claims are fabricated. Sergeant Torres, until we sort this out, you're confined to base pending investigation. Bradley's allegations are serious enough that Pentagon security is reviewing every aspect of this case. As military police escorted me to detention, I realized Bradley had played his ultimate card, using the military's own security protocols to protect himself while neutralizing us. The final battle would be fought in military courtrooms where Bradley still had allies, and where the truth might not be enough to save any of us. The Pentagon conference room felt like a gladiator arena where careers came to die. Media crews lined the hallway like vultures sensing carrion, their cameras capturing every moment of what CNN was calling the military family betrayal hearing. General Patricia Hawkins presided over the tribunal with the cold precision of someone who'd spent 30 years separating truth from military bullshit. To her left sat Bradley Whitmore in his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal perfectly placed, looking like the poster child for military honor. To her right, I sat in my combat-earned dress blues, facing the possibility of spending the rest of my life in Leavenworth. This hearing will determine whether Sergeant Rebecca Torres and her associates have committed treason against the United States, General Hawkins announced to the packed room, or whether former Colonel Bradley Whitmore has orchestrated the systematic exploitation of military families for personal profit. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Bradley's version of events prevailed, every military family fighting property theft would be branded as traitors. If we proved his guilt, it would expose the largest military corruption scandal in modern history. Bradley spoke first, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had convinced judges and juries for 2 decades. General Hawkins, I've dedicated my life to serving military families through legal advocacy. When I discovered that foreign agents were using property disputes to infiltrate military databases, I felt duty-bound to investigate. His performance was masterful, the concerned patriot who'd stumbled onto a conspiracy. He claimed I was working with hostile intelligence services to steal classified information, using property theft allegations as cover for espionage operations. Sergeant Torres has been feeding sensitive military information to civilian attorneys with questionable loyalties, Bradley continued. The so-called evidence against me was fabricated to discredit my investigation into their treasonous activities. The media ate it up. Cable news chyrons read, "Decorated soldier or foreign spy." Bradley had successfully flipped the narrative, making himself the hero and us the villains. Then it was our turn. Colonel Mitchell approached the witness stand with evidence that would have impressed Pentagon war planners. She laid out Bradley's systematic targeting of military families with the precision of a surgical strike. General Hawkins, former Colonel Whitmore used classified military databases to identify vulnerable military families, then coordinated with civilian criminals to steal their property while they served overseas in combat zones. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial records, digital forensics proving Bradley had accessed classified systems to harm military families. But Bradley's legal team challenged every piece of evidence as fabricated by foreign intelligence operatives. The turning point came when Agent Martinez presented the smoking gun, Bradley's own recorded voice planning to murder military families. The courtroom fell silent as Bradley's voice filled the room. Eliminate the Torres woman, and the entire federal case collapses. Military families understand the risks of service. Bradley's face went ashen, but his lawyer immediately objected. That recording was illegally obtained through unconstitutional surveillance of an American citizen. General Hawkins studied the evidence with the intensity of someone evaluating battlefield intelligence. Colonel Whitmore, how do you explain your voice on these recordings planning violence against military families? Bradley's composure cracked for the first time. General, those recordings are sophisticated deepfake technology created by foreign intelligence to frame me. The real question is why Sergeant Torres had access to such advanced fabrication capabilities. But Bradley made his fatal error when he tried to explain away the financial evidence. The money transfers to my accounts were payments for legitimate legal services provided to military families seeking property protection. Agent Martinez stood up with a stack of documents. General Hawkins, if Colonel Whitmore was providing legal services to protect military families, why do our records show him receiving payments from the criminals who stole their property? She presented bank records showing millions of dollars flowing from Karen's shell companies directly into Bradley's accounts, payments made immediately after successful property foreclosures against deployed soldiers. Furthermore, Martinez continued, if Colonel Whitmore was investigating foreign espionage, why didn't he report his concerns through proper military intelligence channels? Why did he instead coordinate with civilian criminals to steal property from the military families he claims to protect? The courtroom erupted. Bradley's story was collapsing under the weight of documented evidence that he'd profited from attacking military families while they served overseas. General Hawkins called for order, her voice cutting through the chaos like a command sergeant major ending a barracks riot. Colonel Whitmore, you have 30 seconds to explain why this tribunal should believe your allegations when the evidence shows you personally profited from attacking military families during their deployment overseas. Bradley stood up, his uniform still perfect, but his face showing the desperation of a man watching his life's work crumble. General, He paused, looking around the room at the media cameras, the military officials, the families he'd destroyed. I invoke my right against self-incrimination. The silence was deafening. In military culture, refusing to answer direct questions from a superior officer was tantamount to confession. General Hawkins's voice carried the finality of a court-martial verdict. Colonel Bradley Whitmore, you are hereby stripped of rank and remanded to federal custody on charges of treason, racketeering, and conspiracy against military families. The United States Army apologizes to every family you betrayed while wearing our uniform. 6 months later, I stood on the front porch of the rebuilt Torres family ranch, watching sunrise paint the Texas hill country gold. The smell of fresh cedar and my grandmother's honeysuckle filled the morning air. But this time, it was mixed with the sounds of children laughing and military families building something beautiful together. Walt Kowalski, despite being 89 and surviving kidnapping by federal criminals, was teaching a group of military kids how to hammer nails in my great-grandfather's reconstructed barn. His weathered hands guided small fingers as he shared stories of Korean War courage and the importance of protecting family legacy. Miss Becca called out 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez, daughter of Staff Sergeant James. Walt says your great-grandpa would be proud of what we built here. I wiped away tears I didn't expect. He would, sweetheart. He definitely would. The federal trials had delivered justice beyond our wildest expectations. Bradley received life imprisonment without parole for treason, the first military officer convicted of systematically targeting military families for foreign profit. Karen got 28 years for racketeering. Their entire network collapsed like a house of cards, with corrupt officials across 8 states facing federal prison time. But the real victory was legislative. The Military Family Property Protection Act passed Congress 435-0, creating bulletproof federal oversight for any legal action targeting deployed service members. Now, predators like Bradley and Karen face automatic federal investigation and mandatory 20-year sentences for exploiting military deployments. The ranch became the Military Family Heritage Center, supported by donations from veteran organizations nationwide. Our legal aid office had already protected 43 military families from predatory schemes. The main building buzzed with activity as retired military attorneys taught base family readiness groups how to recognize and resist civilian predators. Captain Patricia Washington, now our chief legal advocate, had created a network spanning all 50 states. We're not just protecting property, she told the PBS documentary crew. We're keeping America's promise to military families, that while you serve overseas, your home is safe. The documentary Stolen Service reached 15 million viewers on Veterans Day, inspiring protective legislation in 12 states and teaching military families nationwide how to fight back against predators who target their service. Walt became an unlikely hero, speaking at veteran events about surviving kidnapping and exposing federal corruption. At 90, he had more energy than men half his age, driven by his mission to protect other military families. I let those criminals use my age against Becca's family once, he'd tell audiences, but every deployed soldier deserves neighbors who'll fight for them when they can't fight for themselves. The financial recovery exceeded $43 million for all 17 targeted families. But watching military children play safely in my grandmother's garden while their parents deployed overseas, that was priceless. My PTSD, which had worsened during our legal battle, finally healed through protecting other military families. The combat skills I'd learned in Afghanistan now served a different mission, defending the home front from domestic enemies who preyed on military service. My phone rang while I was reviewing center operations. Unknown number, but I answered with confidence now. Sergeant Torres, this is Colonel Jennifer Hayes from Fort Carson, Colorado. We have an urgent situation involving a funeral home director who's been targeting Gold Star families. He waits until military spouses are buried, then forecloses on grieving widows while they're planning memorial services. We've identified at least 12 families he's victimized, including a Medal of Honor recipient's widow. I looked out at military families working together in my grandmother's garden, healing through service and community. The center had grown from personal tragedy into a national movement protecting military families from civilian predators. Colonel Hayes, send everything immediately. The Military Family Heritage Center doesn't just fight individual cases. We're building a national shield protecting every military family from predators who mistake service for vulnerability. Walt appeared beside me, hammer still in his weathered hands. Another fight, Becca? Another fight, Walt. But this time, we're not fighting alone. The war against military family exploitation continues, but now we have an army. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below. You might be our next case featured on HOA Stories. Subscribe to the HOA Stories channel and ring that notification bell if you want to see justice served to scammers who target our heroes. Together, we're proving that America never abandons those who serve.
You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens get a reality check. If this episode gave you secondhand rage or satisfaction, hit that like, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're the first in line for more weekly HOA chaos.